Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, thank you so much for being here. I'm Elevated Dabber, your host, and this is You Live in a Bitmap. This is our sixth weekly edition of this talk, which every week I kind of start out with this same introduction. I remind people why we're here, what this is about. The purpose of You Live in a Bitmap is to think bigger about bitmaps and metaverses, to explore the possibilities of what bitmap is, what it can be, and to have a broader point of view about the nature of reality. This is not a space where we care about floor price or sentiment about the ordinals collection. This is a place where we gather together to think about an objective source of truth. What does an objective source of truth mean? How do we take this information with us about the nature of our own world? How do we take that with us as we create new worlds, new virtual worlds? This week, I'd like to talk a little bit about the role of science fiction in the way that we conceive of the metaverse. Think about throughout your life the times where you've been exposed to ideas about the future. Not just about the metaverse, but just ideas about the future in general. We're like a fly stuck in amber. We have perception over the world that's right in front of us, the familiar. But the world is accelerating really, really quickly. Think about how much has changed just within your own lifetime. And the older you are, the more you've seen things change. Think about how that change is accelerating. How the introduction of new technologies, throughout your lifetime, and then if you project forward, what kinds of new technologies will be developed later in your life, or what technologies will be developed after we're gone that will continue to accelerate. I'd like to give you guys first some quotes. These are 10 different quotes about the role of science fiction. And these are all from famous science fiction authors. So when you ask the question, why does a science fiction author write science fiction? What's the purpose of science fiction? Here's 10 perspectives. Isaac Asimov said, science fiction writers foresee the inevitable. And although problems and catastrophes may be inevitable, solutions are not. Ray Bradbury said, science fiction is the most important literature in the history of the world because it's the history of ideas, the history of our civilization birthing itself. Arthur C. Clarke said, science fiction is something that could happen, but usually you wouldn't want it to. Fantasy is something that couldn't happen, though often you only wish that it could. Philip K. Dick said, the basic tool for the manipulation of reality is the manipulation of words. If you can control the meaning of words, you can control the people who must use the words. Ursula Le Guin said, science fiction is not predictive, it is descriptive. Margaret Atwood says, science fiction is filled with Martians and space travel to other planets and things like that, which is fine, but it's not where I am. William Gibson said, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. Think about that. The future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed. H.G. Wells says, there is no difference between time and any of the three dimensions of space, except that our consciousness moves along it. Neil Gaiman says, the world always seems brighter when you've just made something that wasn't there before. Robert Heinlein says, a generation which ignores history has no past, and no future. Think about those 10 quotes. Think about what these science fiction writers are trying to tell you about why they write, what the purpose of science fiction is. Consider that science fiction is a way of dealing with the inevitability of technological advancement, human advancement, and the challenges that are still to come. In The Matrix, the Oracle tells Neo that you can't see past choices that you don't understand. What choices have we perhaps made already that we don't understand about the future of our civilization? What choices have we made internally about the purpose of a metaverse, what we hope to create in a metaverse? What choices have we made as a society about the kinds of things that technology can provide and the kinds of things that technology can never change? Think about that carefully today. So those of you who've been paying attention to the timeline have noticed that this week, in lieu of a normal sort of prose article like the articles that I typically put out before our talks, I wrote 2 chapters of a new work of fiction called Heroes of the Refresh. If you're not familiar, if you didn't happen to catch those, I shared links in the nest to both chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Heroes of the Refresh. I'm not going to be doing this every week. In the future weeks, we're going to probably stick to the prose essay kind of format for our talks. But for this week, and maybe this week alone, I'd actually like to read from some of the fiction that I've written. And these first 2 chapters that I've written are both pretty short reads, but they're going to set the setting for this story, Here's the Refresh. And so I'm going to read these first couple of chapters to you, with you. And then I'd like to talk to you a little bit about why I'm writing this. What's the purpose of Heroes of the Refresh? Once again, why do science fiction writers write science fiction? What's the purpose of it? And what's the purpose of this literary work? What am I hoping to achieve with it? And how can we take this experience of writing speculative fiction and apply that as we build a metaverse using bitmaps? Heroes of the Refresh, Chapter 1, The Awakening. In the heart of the Juniper district of the block, where towering structures with iridescent shimmering panels reached into a boundless vanilla sky, Elio and Zalura meandered through the neon market. A bustling nexus presented itself. Vendors selling exotic knickknacks, jacks, lobos, stems. The air saturated with the synthetic aroma of spiced cherry, the unending buzz of the neon signs, an electric pulse that paints the cobblestones like a kaleidoscope. Above them, drones hummed softly, casting fleeting shadows. You could feel their glance. They hovered diagonally over the duo as they navigated through the crowd. Elio's attention was momentarily captured by the gleam of an old mechanical toy, its cogs whirring softly amidst the chaos. It was a rare find in this epic of the block, a nostalgic relic that reminded him of the world outside the block, a world less vibrant, but perhaps more real. The contrast between the mechanical simplicity of the toy and the complex digital illusions around them were jarring. They made his mind hurt. I hate this place. His mouth formed the words, but you couldn't hear anything here. Zalura, with her keen eye for the peculiar, paused at a stall draped in shimmering veils that claimed to sell memories, each packaged neatly in luminescent orbs. She picked one, her fingers brushing against the cool surface, feeling a vague resonance that tugged at the edge of her consciousness. Elio, ever skeptical of the block's offerings, watched her with a furrowed brow. Be careful with those. You could hardly hear him over the din of bargaining voices and procedurally generated birdsong. As Zalura peered into the orb, the memory it held flickered. A brief vision of a beach, with golden sands, under a sunset that never seemed to set. A place neither of them remembered visiting. The image glitched, the sun jerking back and forth against the horizon. It was something you almost don't see. Most people don't see it. A slight echo in this smooth flow of time. Something in the data stream. Those memories, they aren't just broken, they're wrong, Elio said quietly, more to himself than to Zalura. His voice carried a weight of resignation, born of too many disappointments. Zalura looked up at him, her eyes reflected in the neon lights, yet shadowed by concern. But what if they show us something true? She countered, her voice tinged with a mix of hope and fear. This brief exchange was a dance they had perfected over time. His caution, balanced by her relentless curiosity. A careful tango where balance must be respected or both shall fall. Zalura's eyes widened, and she quickly set the orb down, her gaze meeting Elio's. They shared a silent moment of realization. The perfection of the block was a facade, occasionally cracked by such anomalies. "Let's get the hell out of here," he said, perhaps a bit too loud. This kind of glitch was so minor and so easily overlooked by so many. As they left the stall, the vibrant colors of the marketplace seemed dimmer, bolder, and almost mocking them. Chapter 2. Opting Out. He picked up his stylus. The History of the Metaverse by Marcus Clarion. Forward. June 19th, 2191. Parcel 251, Elmridge District. CEP Level 1 unaligned. The nights here have a stillness you wouldn't believe. When you close your eyes, you hear nothing. Not no thing, no. Not nothing like you're thinking. Nothing. The affirmative, positive something that is nothing. Hearing it takes many years of practice for outlanders like me, or so I'm told. But for the natives, it's a basic life skill, like the sort of balance one needs to ride a holocycle or withstand shift echoes on the hyperline over wake-stable velocities. When you come from a place where silence is something you buy by the V-byte, the idea of an abundant silence, a true silence, one that's a base layer, a fact. Fact. Holy shit. When you come from a place like that, your mind is full of echoes of the many millions of voices plucked like strings by unseen musicians, playing a tune not of harmony, but of slavery. Even when those echoes stop, and I never thought they could have stopped until I got here, we still hear the other voices. The internal monologue, the mitote. The external voices of the system internalized, repeated. A system of internal allegiance to the bonds of slavery. It took me time to hear the nothing. I'm still listening for it. But I'll tell you what I know so far. The fall. During the early to mid 21st century, central banks turned the money printers on full blast. Then they left them that way. At first, they tried to control inflation with interest rates and monetary policy, but the center could not hold. They eventually had to roll back rate controls to keep the house of cards from falling, triggering an unending cycle of inflation which grew larger and more unpredictable, until it escalated into full-on hyperinflation. The economic instability led to widespread financial crises, undermining trust in traditional monetary systems and government institutions. One by one, the banks failed, and the government stepped in. And again. until eventually over 80% of the assets in the banking system were on government balance sheets. The premeditated nationalization of central banks was the final nail in the coffin of the illusion known as liberal democracy. They called this period the Fall. Parallel to the economic turmoil, advancements in artificial intelligence and automation technologies resulted in significant job displacement. This automation, initially intended to increase efficiency and reduce labor costs, contributed to an unprecedented rise in unemployment rates. The societal impact was profound. As unemployment soared, urban areas saw the formation of militias and cadres. These groups often comprised former labor union members and unemployed workers who banded together for survival. Over time, these militias gained control of significant portions of cities, establishing territories where so-called law enforcement dared not enter. This period marked a significant decline in public safety and order long before the Great Strike began. While homelessness had always existed, sheer numbers of jobless families overwhelmed what was left of the system, leading to a crisis never seen before. Massive seas of tent-toting families, dirty sweatpants, and big box store cardboard, shifting around each day and night, evading police patrols, evading National Guard troops, and most of all, hiding from the cadres, who were known to shoot on sight, or worse. This was made more complicated by the immigration crisis, with thousands of new migrants arriving each day, earning the immediate and visceral ire of the Marxian lots of domestic economic refugees, the displaced, as termed by the government of the day. Government programs aimed at addressing these issues were frequently criticized and mistrusted, viewed by many as ineffective, or worse, covert operations for more sinister purposes, such as forced deportations or unethical medical experiments. With historical perspective, we now know these deportations indeed happened and were commonplace. No definitive evidence was ever produced about the medical experiments. In this context of escalating social and economic instability, the first centralized virtual environments were developed. These platforms emerged as sanctuaries from the harsh realities of the outside world, offering an alternate space where individuals could escape the societal collapse. In the beginning, they were rudimentary, nothing like the immersive technology that would soon come. These were all precursors to the block. In the mid-21st century, technology conglomerate Genesis Corporation released Update 12 of the Metatron control software, which enabled their virtual immersion units to interface with the centralized data servers that hosted the first metaverse that anyone really called the metaverse without a sense of irony: the block. The block offered an immersive escape to a world that desperately wanted one. It rapidly gained popularity. As it evolved, it became more than just an escape. It offered a new way of life. On the outside, there were riots, breadlines, race wars, cages, and quarantines. But the inside was a world of neon, gold, and clean blacks and grays. It was a tidier world, one which offered an escape from the madness. Early adopters began spending increasing amounts of time within this metaverse, initially frequenting metaverse bars and lounges for social interaction and relaxation. Gradually, these virtual settings expanded to include workplaces, leading to the phenomenon of individuals living virtually full-time. The development of stasis pods, another Genesis innovation, and other life support technologies eventually made it possible for users to remain continuously connected to the block. They called it opting out. In the beginning, only nut jobs and true believers opted out. Then, by the hundreds, and the thousands, and eventually by the millions. Eventually, the day came when practically everyone had opted out. That's the end of chapter 2 of Heroes of the Refresh. Thank you guys for listening to the first couple of chapters. It's been a great experience writing the first couple of chapters. Naturally, I've spent a lot of time giving thought to some major plot points that are to come in the story. And it's very interesting and exciting to have this opportunity to world build. So it raises the question, why am I writing this? What's the point? What's the point of Heroes of the Refresh? Why not just write more essays? Why not just write more articles and essays and prose talking about these ideas in theory? Why am I writing some kind of a fictional story about this? I will tell you. It's because of what those 10 writers that we quoted at the beginning of this talk said. Again, Isaac Asimov said, science fiction writers foresee the inevitable. And although problems and catastrophes may be inevitable, solutions are not. We're giving thought to the development of a metaverse. And all of this within the context that we ourselves may live in some kind of metaverse, some kind of bitmap. And now we're creating our own metaverses, our own virtual environments. And Asimov says science fiction writers foresee the inevitable. Problems and catastrophes may be inevitable, but solutions are not. What kinds of problems and catastrophes could be around the corner as simulation, metaverse style technology gets more and more advanced, and we get to the point where metaverses are a place that you actually want to spend a lot of your time, or the majority of your time? What happens when we get to the point where simulation is so real that you can't tell the difference anymore, really, between what we consider to be our real world and the simulated world? What kind of risks does that pose to a free society? And how do we build in such a way that we build for freedom and that we build a heaven, build a persistent metaverse where we can all build our own personal heavens, our own paradises? How do we provide for that and avoid creating some kind of centralized hell? And how do we avoid bringing the problems of the outside world with us into the metaverse? How do we avoid building the same problems and the same structures in there that we've built out here? Why are we trying to build a metaverse at all, if not for the fact that there are some things out here that don't work very well? Does the intent behind why you build a metaverse impact the results of what you get? Is there a difference between building a metaverse to create something versus building a metaverse to escape something? These are the critical questions that I hope to address with Heroes of the Refresh. What I've learned through my own experience with science fiction is that science fiction is the inspiration that gets people to think about these ideas. Ideas that are not necessarily relevant to the day-to-day of our regular lives, but ideas that question and broaden the experience of what it means to be a human being, and how technology and its evolution can empower us to create wonders and can also empower us to create dystopias. Heroes of the Refresh is an attempt to take the ideas that I hope to communicate through Quantum Bitmap Theory and through these talks to a broader audience that doesn't care about bitmaps, to a broader audience that doesn't care about Bitcoin or crypto or ordinals projects, but to be able to bring these ideas to a general audience of human beings who are interested in the future, excited about the future, who are curious about and contemplative and intellectual about their own existence, where we came from, where we're going, and why. These are the reasons we write science fiction. So what am I writing? I'm writing a story about the metaverse. And it's a story that I won't spoil. I don't intend to share any spoilers here. I have some very interesting plot twists coming down the road. This story is written in such a way that it's designed to play with your perceptions of reality. And that's the central theme, right? That's the central theme. Anytime we write speculative fiction talking about the metaverse, we're talking about the nature of reality. Because if you were in a simulation that didn't really feel very real, it wasn't immersive, it wouldn't be a metaverse. It would just be, it would be like a game, like playing a game. The metaverse becomes a metaverse when we take it seriously. The metaverse becomes the metaverse when we start caring about it as though it's a place that we really live, that we really inhabit. As we build these initial, early versions of the metaverse, in chapter 2 of Heroes of the Refresh, I referred to, the early 21st century, these rudimentary virtual environments that people built. Realize that it won't take very many years for us to get to the point where we can create virtual environments that are not rudimentary, that are not Roblox, Minecraft instance realities, but that feel more and more real, places that we can customize and personalize and decorate, places where we can put the things that we wish to see every day, places where we can create virtual communities and files and groups which are organized based on ideas, not based on geographical proximity. Imagine entire nation states defined not by where you live physically, or what continent you're in, or what part of what continent you're in. Imagine that you could have a group of people who opt in to a set of agreements, and that those sets of agreements can all interact with each other via what I referred to a few weeks ago as a meta protocol, a protocol of protocols. Imagine having several autonomous sovereign states all existing in a completely virtual geography. People from all over the world choosing to opt in and join various states or polities based on principles, based on agreements, based on ideas. These ideas were explored at length by Neil Stephenson. He's the author of Snow Crash, A Diamond Age, and he's also the person who coined the term metaverse. Anyone who's interested in the metaverse really should go back and read those books. Read Snow Crash, read A Diamond Age, read Cryptonomicon. You should be reading Neil Stephenson. You should be reading William Gibson. You should be reading Neuromancer. Because everything that we're building, or that we think we're building in a metaverse, was first envisioned by these authors who had to give thought to technologies that didn't exist yet and consider what can the ramifications of these technologies be and how does it affect what we build. If there's anyone here who's a fan of Star Trek, I'm a huge fan of Star Trek. Consider all of the technologies that have been introduced as speculative technologies in Star Trek that over time have become more and more real. Science fiction is more than a speculation. It's a gateway to the soul of who we are, what we believe, and how we envision the future. So the question is, what kind of future do we wish to create? How can we use science fiction to tell stories in a way that cause people to think about things they've never thought about before and start confronting the reality of these things before we build them. How can we avoid making the same mistake once? I'd like to invite anybody here who has any ideas related to any of the following topics to come up on the stage. Anything about bitmaps, anything about science fiction, your first science fiction that you loved and why you loved it, what you think the metaverse looks like based on the science fiction you've been exposed to. Consider today as an opportunity to take off the guardrails and to be completely open-minded about what the future can be, what kind of future we can build together, what it looks like. I'd like to invite anyone from the crowd who'd like to come up and speak. I am taking speaker requests. I'm going to grab a drink real quick, and while I grab this drink, please get those speaker requests in. Do appreciate all of you for being here. Would love to hear what all of you have to say about sci-fi, about Heroes of the Refresh, about the metaverse, bitmaps, your first experiences with these ideas through sci-fi. Get those speaker requests in, guys. I'm going to grab a drink. All right. Thank you guys so much for getting those speaker requests in. We have 3 new speakers on the stage. Appreciate all of you. I will try to do this in the order that the requests came in. Astral Architect, welcome to the stage. Thank you for being here, my dude.
Hey, bro. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. Hear you great. Loud and clear. How are you doing this beautiful Saturday?
I'm very excited to be in this space right now. You've done amazing work as always with your delivery and getting us outside our boxes. And not to kiss your ass or nothing, but I just want to say, dude, like it feels good to be in a room with people that are on a similar wavelength or same wavelength, even in some respects. And it just makes the difficult parts of being a little bit more bearable. So that's really cool. You talked about the metaverse from the perspective of the greats that came before us in speculative fiction, and William Gibson is someone that I remember reading years and years ago, specifically Neuromancer, I think it was, and it connected dots for me that I hadn't done in my own life as an aspiring writer. It made me realize that the things that I'd studied and the passions that I had growing up, uh, I could turn into fiction to sort of keep the idea alive. Because one of my big passions is the creation myths and stuff like that in ancient Gnosticism, and the idea that you could just project that into a future space using sci-fi and speculative fiction came about after reading books like Neuromancer. Another really good one for me was War of the Worlds. As a teenager, uh, lots of space opera like science fiction. It's played a huge part in shaping who I am as a person and the way I think today. So I just wanted to say I feel at least you're spot on with your observations today, and the fiction is awesome. Keep writing, dude.
Yeah, huge love, Astral. Thank you. I appreciate the kind words, and yeah, that's. I think you're right. I think it is special to be in this room with so many of you who are on similar wavelengths, or sometimes even the same wavelength about some of the things that we're working on. It is really special. I mean, if you take a look at Twitter, and I will call it Twitter till the day I die. I refuse to call it X. When you look on Twitter and you see the kinds of spaces that are going on a Saturday, and you think about the mentality of, people who are on Twitter on a Saturday, what they're doing, you have diametrically opposed. Here you have people that are obviously interested in the more intellectual, kind of finer points of theory. Whereas in some of these other spaces, every other space is just some kind of a influencer-led pump your bag space that's all about people pumping shitcoin tokens that everyone who's trading them knows have no internal value, no intrinsic project, nothing behind them. They're just these sort of momentary pump and dump attention scams. And that's what people think of when they think of crypto. They think of Web3. They think of that, right? Because that's 99.9999% of what's going on in this space. But I love the fact that technology, in this case, ordinals, has led us to the point where we can start creating things that are completely brand new. I mean, things that have never been done before. Never before. I mean, just really think about this. Like, it's 2024. Look on the calendar. It's 2024. Bitcoin has existed less than 15 years. First time in human history, we created something like Bitcoin, a decentralized, immutable source of record. It was never even possible before Bitcoin for us to be talking about building a metaverse on some kind of decentralized, unfuckable truth layer. No such layer even existed 15 years ago. And here we are talking about bitmaps in this context. I mean, these are new ideas. These are ideas that the average person has never thought about. The average person has never thought about even why Bitcoin exists, let alone what a substrate is. What does it mean for reality to have a truth layer? I mean, these are ideas that are just so not being talked about in the culture, but they're important ideas, and they're ideas that are important because these things are coming, and we need to prepare ourselves. We need to think now about the inevitable things that are coming and how we want, what kind of a future we want to live into. And so I think it's just remarkable to be in a room like this with people who are interested in that kind of stuff. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else on Twitter right now. Yo, Astral, thank you so much for coming up. Please do stay on the stage. We'd love to hear more from you. Second up on the mic today, Dev9, my guy, I appreciate you. Thank you again so much for being here. Would love to hear your thoughts, my friend.
Hey, hi.
Hey, what's up, buddy? How you doing today?
Good. Nice to be here. So, listen, are you ready for as per usual, a little dance? So, coming from an opposite side here. Okay, now let me just introduce kind of the why that is. So, my dad, my father was a huge sci-fi fan, right? I mean, he consumed so much sci-fi. There were so many books in my house, and for some reason, I probably can say I've read one sci-fi book in my life. I think it's probably Dune. Okay, and my dad and I, we have so much in common, right? But that one thing, for some reason, he loved it. He would talk, like yourself, right? He would know the authors and all that, and I could just never could take to it. But on the flip side, I was so interested in quantum physics, all things natural science, anthropology, all things real, basically. And for that reason, somehow it just science fiction. I couldn't take it. And so, like when you say, for example, like science fiction authors, what Isaac Asimov said, that they inevitably predict the future. What I would say, or as far as I know, is that actually probably just a few of them do. Like most science fiction speculations just don't pan out that way, or in every generation people foresee the future in kind of weird ways that never turns out to be exactly that. But some do. And so all I want to bring forth here really is the notion that science fiction, it's also, to me, it's like science reality. It's like I would be very interested in things like you know esoteric notions, right? Like that's far out, right? That's like kind of like science fiction, but it had to do with like things, possibilities within human consciousness, things like that. And so ultimately, I'm just kind of pointing out the notion, and I think you know this, but that really truly good science fiction, as those who are able to really foresee, not only do they see a problem and solution on a certain timeline, but they can even see beyond it, back to reality. Um, and I feel they probably had very insight to be able to do that. And so I think it's a scary thing for many people. Technology, the future. It's easy to get caught up in these notions. And I think right now we're very much in that kind of time, like with AI and all these ideas. Um, but I believe that you know humans are going to dictate ultimately the reality of it. Like reality is going to dictate in the end, not fiction. And yeah, it's part of the big story and understanding how things are really going to kind of go. And just as a simple example here, like in the movie The Matrix, that's a science fiction, and it's very much like a metaverse notion, right? And people are plugged into this metaverse, and it's kind of dystopian. It's very dystopian, but it just doesn't make sense because although someone could say, yeah, that's the direction that things are going, it's like the incentive in the Matrix is very kind of strange. They're using the human beings, right, in the movie as batteries for like an energy source, right? Which just, I mean, it's, yeah, I guess it could make sense. It's if you make that stretch of an imagination that energy is so scarce and our technologies haven't been able to resolve it, that you would need to cultivate it from human beings, but the incentive is not there. So like uh the notion that some governments or system or corporations is going to supply us with a metaverse, and have an incentive to keep us like pods or in a you know stuck in that metaverse, it doesn't make any sense, because then what is their incentive to do that? um like there's no monetary gain for them to do that, so it would have to be a political thing. So like there would have to be politicians that would reward those corporations to keep us in a pod, which doesn't make any sense because humans are not going to elect politicians that do that. So we're never going to get there. So yeah, it's a super interesting question. In other words, I think you're approaching something that's very, very deep and broad and so complex, very interesting, and I think I think it's great, to talk about these things and formulate these ideas at this time, in a serious way, because things are happening right now. Like we're at the door of the future, the metaverse, AI, all those things. So yeah, anyway, I just wanted to bring that point of view of science. It's basically to say reality goes beyond fiction, basically, right?
Awesome. Dev9,
Yeah.
thank you very, very much. Appreciate you joining us on the stage. Please do stay on the stage. Would love to hear more from you during today's talk. Astral, I see your hand up. We'll get back to you in a second. I'd like to welcome Marvelous to the stage. Marvelous Comeback, thank you so much for joining us on the stage today and for being here on this Saturday. How you doing today, my friend?
Hey, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for hosting in such good company of deep thinkers. And actually, what you're saying is true. On a Saturday evening, what can you do? I choose to spend my time like this. Anyway, I was thinking of this idea that we live in biological metaverse already, which is very complex because we don't even understand all the rules that govern this place. If you go to Nikola Tesla's works, he explains everything differently, through energy and waves, which today's science cannot really incorporate to have a unified vision of how to explain the universe. So we live in this biological metaverse, which is very complex, and we are actually, through bitmap, for example, creating a very rudimentary, I like to call it like limited parameter environment where we have the chance to actually pick up the pieces and create something more complex, but we're just at the beginning stages. And I think this process could be repeating, like, with AI. What is that actually doing? It's converging information. It's bringing everything into the point of singularity. And what if God is singularity, and we're just in the process of merging everything? But then again, the reverse might happen at a certain point, and there's fragmentation, and we go the other way. So perhaps we're just in this moment where we are building, but we actually see the direction this is going in, and very fast too, right? So we have, like you say, this opportunity and perhaps chance to create another iteration of a world that is better, that is perhaps for now simpler than this biological metaverse that we're in, but ultimately could match it in terms of complexity and possibility, and perhaps be even better. Yeah, these are my thoughts.
Awesome. Marvelous. Thank you so much for joining us on stage. I appreciate you. And please do stay on the stage. Would love to hear more from you later in the talk. Astro, you had your hand up. Love to take it back to you, sir.
Yeah, if I may, my app says my hand is still up, but I'm satisfied speaking right now, so please ignore that. Okay, it went away. I wanted to comment a little bit on what Dev9 had said, because I have a very different understanding of the Matrix and how it exists as a speculative work of fiction. And it's just an alternative idea. Like that's my only point here. And the Matrix is largely based on the idea of simulation theory. Not saying that this is something that we ever opted into as a people, but saying that this is the situation in which we actually find ourselves now. Is the understanding I have of the underlying plot and overall theme of the Matrix, and it has deep roots in simulation theory, of course, and in I want to say the second Matrix, that's when they introduced the Architect, who you guys might imagine is my favorite character. And the Architect is actually an embodiment, or Dabber, maybe you can help me with the word here. When you take something like a god, for example, and you embody it, you give it form. That's what the Architect basically is a god of the existence of the Matrix, right? And
Can I,
with
can I jump in real quick, Astro?
yeah,
That
I don't want to go too far.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no. You're great. I'm gonna let you go a lot further, actually, but I just wanted to jump in really quick and comment on something you said. The architect is like Laplace's demon. I
Yes.
used this
Yes.
analogy in one of the prior articles. This idea that Laplace's demon is this entity that exists outside of the closed system of what we consider to be, the matrix or the metaverse or whatever. They're on the outside looking in. And because they're on the outside, actually, Astro, could you mute real quick? Because I'm getting an echo. Thank you. I appreciate that. Um, so the architect is like this person with perfect information. He's looking in to this universe of the matrix and he has perfect information. What does it mean to have perfect information? It means that you can see everything. You can see all of the particles and their momentum, right? Now, the idea behind Laplace's demon, it's an analogy for determinism. The architect is a personification of determinism. So, from the architect's perspective, the future's already written. Everything that's going to happen is already knowable by the architect. As far as he's concerned, there's no mystery. He can see every possibility, every quantum reality. He can see what's going to happen. He can see what Neo's going to do in every reality, and it's all solved for him. But somehow he's wrong. Somehow what the architect foresees doesn't come to pass. Something else comes to pass. And the reason why is because the universe is not simply a function of determinism. There's a quantum aspect. The oracle represents that quantum aspect. If the role of the architect is to balance the equation, she says, her role is to unbalance it. I think the Matrix is about free will and determinism. I think it's about the power of choice and how choice is the variable that the machines can't understand. The Oracle says you can't see past a choice you don't understand. She also says that man can't see past any choice, referring to the architect. He can't understand choice, and that's why he can't understand why Neo would make the choice he makes at the end of the second movie, which leads to a different result. The architect is determinism. Okay, I'm going to butt out and let you keep talking. Thank you, Oscar.
No, that was perfect, and it ties into where I was headed actually, which is the archetype is the word that I was looking for. By the way, the architect is the archetype of a story we've been telling for thousands of years, and I mentioned this a few minutes ago. Ancient Gnosticism is sort of like humanity's first discussion or framework or belief system, however you want to look at it, that discusses the possibility of living in a simulation. In it, there is the God of this world that we find ourselves in, but he, like the architect, is imperfect and can't fully orchestrate existence. And because of that, anomalies occur. Those anomalies are our free will. And our free will is given to us by the spark of the divine that exists in every soul that gives us life. That's getting a little spiritual, a little woo-woo, but here's the point that I'm making. We've been telling this story of the possible existence of a macro existence outside of the existence that we ourselves are in. Is that not the primary definition of a metaverse, I'm posing, I guess, which is that there is a macro existence, our reality, and a micro existence fashioned by us, which is the metaverse. And so it's, if that holds true, if you believe in simulation theory, or if you don't, but you just think it's interesting, and you look at it and apply it to the building of metaverses, whether it's on Bitmap or it's a sandbox type thing where there are no constraints, you're doing like Marvelous was saying and creating this, and that's a fantastic term, by the way, Marvelous. Limited parameter. What did you say? Environments, I believe it was.
Yeah,
Limited
something.
parameter environments.
Yes, limited parameter, and then add whatever you want to that.
Yeah, it's a fantastic explanation of what we're creating today. by building metaverses on Bitcoin and such, and on Bitmap specifically. And, we're creating these very simplistic, rudimentary simulations that people can go in and have a specific experience. And I think that this is not quite the tipping point for this. I think we're too early for the tipping point to occur. But I think in my generation, before I pass, hopefully, uh, the tools and techniques that Dabber has outlined today to introduce these ideas outside of crypto space are super important. They're so important. And we've been doing it for years now without knowing it. I'm talking about William Gibson. And I'm talking about, let's see, around the time that Bitcoin was created, I think Ready Player One was published or shortly thereafter. And these are the early tales of the metaverse, right? And Neil Stephenson was the other guy's name, I believe, Dabber?
Yes.
The coiner of the term itself, like these books all are leading to where we are at right now. And how exciting is that we're the ones sitting down trying to solve these problems and come up with solutions. I'm done waxing now, but I just wanted to thank everybody again for letting me ramble and sort of spitball about what I think about where we're headed.
Astral, thank you so much. Quick question for you. Have you ever read the book The Divine Invasion?
I have not. Is the author Neil Stephenson or someone else?
No, it is Philip K. Dick, but I think you would really enjoy reading both Valis and The Divine Invasion because it relates directly to the kind of Gnosticism and sort of mythology that you're referring to, as far as like simulations, as far as information webs, information being communicated through light. There was an initial short story that he wrote called Chains of Air, Web of Ether, which was kind of the inspiration before he wrote The Divine Invasion. Those are books I think you would really enjoy. They tie in with your interests.
I will add them to the list of reads. Thank you, sir.
Dev9, like to welcome you back up.
Hey, so yeah, this is not an easy topic to formulate, on the fly. There's so much to it. I remember talking with a friend years ago. Just came to mind. He spoke to me about I think the book is called The Simulacra. I think that's the book that's at the basis of the Matrix.
What you're referring to is Simulacra and Simulation by Jean Baudrillard.
Right. Exactly. It was a small book. I remember he showed it to me. We had these lengthy discussions. He was a really far out guy. He had his whole apartment was just racks and racks of books, libraries of books. That's all he really cared about. And we'd have coffee and just talk. But coming from such different sides. But I remember that conversation. I forget what the initial topic, but it ended up into the whole Matrix, and he explained to me where it came from and the meaning of the simulacra and all that. And so Astral is bringing up the notion of the simulation. I guess my point of view with the simulation thing, it's kind of the point that, when I say reality is greater than fiction, or like you said, Astral, you said the word spiritual. He says, without getting a little woohoo, but I would propose that that's actually not the woohoo at all. The fiction is the woohoo. That's why it's the fiction, right? So, in essence, what it boils down to is that the simulation, okay, or whatever the fiction of what the simulation would be, or this notion that people can speculate in the future, like whatever it is, we're going to be driving, we're going to have flying cars, or any other notions, or like the Matrix, is that the simulation, or whatever it's going to be, the science has to be a tool or an ends to a means for human beings, for reality. Like the reality always wins. it could be a question of a few generations, 2, 3, 4 generations, where the fiction can happen, but ultimately the reality comes back, and there's like reasons behind that. But yeah, so the I think that the technology, in other words, is going to have to be a tools for a means for an end, but not an end in itself. When people speculate in terms of like science for human beings, of course, that it's going to be an end, and they take away the equation of the humans and the reality, that's where they go wrong. And I think that's where those who do hit the nail on the head actually have the insight. And so I think for us, as you know, we think of things, we should be fearless in that, and not, and I'm not saying that this is the case, but oftentimes, you know, when you kind of extrapolate technologies or whatever, you can get to these very dystopian end results. To remember that we're the ones that are going to decide how and what to, you know, these things are going to be used for, and they're going to be used for us. You know, not like in the Matrix, we're going to be at at their service. And I think that's how it happens every single time. It's kind of like the idea of evil. Evil never wins, and there's a reason evil never wins. It can win for a time, for a short time, but the reason it can't win is because nature is not evil, and every new child that's born is not evil, cannot be evil. And so there's always this renewal, and the reality or the quantum physics will always be far beyond, you know, any simulation. So yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that's my you know, the way I look at all these things, AI and the metaverse. It's, these things are for us to build, and they're for us to use and to serve us, right? And ultimately in the spiritual, for the spiritual reasons, which are not woohoo at all, right?
Awesome.
It's another twist, another perspective. Yeah.
Thank you, Dev9. Marvelous, I saw you had your hand up. Go for it.
I'd like to be the third person to restate this, that maybe the deeper things, like the soul and the spiritual, are actually the essence of what is to understand technology, what is to be fluent in navigating this world that is so complex. I would like to use the Matrix because it has been exploited here in a bit. So let's continue. We say that they don't understand choice. The architect, the machines, they don't understand it, and the oracle is that counterbalance, it's that wild card. So if we ponder the idea of the connection to the one that is all, and all of that is one, the oneness, we come to the idea of the soul, because soul to me is knowledge, which the machines have, plus feeling, another form of understanding which they lack. So they don't have soul, they don't have the complete picture of the world that is surrounding them. That's why they don't understand choice. And choice could be understood as destiny, you know, like we make choices in our life that we think are right, and we're trying to maybe get away from something or reach a certain point, but destiny is going to just take us wherever we need to be later on. So, and we get there because we are not machines, we are actually operating on a deeper level. So this is also what I wanted to highlight, that to understand, let's say, these soulless things, these dry concepts, is very difficult if you don't delve into some sort of spirituality and contemplation of how the world is, that science doesn't explain fully. And maybe that was what was limiting the machines from actually understanding how the whole matrix operates, and they were always wrong.
So I'd like to read a quote. Thank you, Marvelous. I'd like to read a quote. This is from The Matrix Reloaded. This is from the second film. And this is an exchange between the Merovingian, one of the machine characters, and Morpheus, one of the human characters. The Merovingian says, "You see, there is only one constant, one universal. It is the only real truth. Causality. Action, reaction, cause and effect." Morpheus says, "Everything begins with choice." Merovingian says, "No, wrong. Choice is an illusion, created between those with power and those without. Look there at that woman. My God, just look at her. Affecting everyone around her. So obvious, so bourgeois, so boring. But wait. Watch. You see, I have sent her a dessert, a very special dessert. I wrote it myself. It starts so simply, each line of the program creating a new effect, just like poetry. First, a rush. Heat. Her heart flutters. You can see it, Neo, yes? She does not understand why. It is the wine? No. What is it then? What is the reason? And soon it does not matter. Soon the why and the reason are gone, and all that matters is the feeling itself. This is the nature of the universe. We struggle against it. We fight to deny it. But it is, of course, pretense. It is a lie. Beneath our poised appearance, the truth is, we are completely out of control. Causality. There is no escape from it. We are forever slaves to it. Our only hope, our only peace, is to understand it, to understand the why. Why is what separates us from them, you from me. Why is the only real social power. Without it, you are powerless. So this serves to illustrate the difference between the way the machines understand the world, their understanding of the Matrix and what it's for, and what Morpheus sees. From Morpheus's perspective, everything begins with choice. At the end of the third movie, Revolutions, Neo is fighting Smith, and Smith is beating the shit out of him, and Neo just keeps getting up, and Smith says, "What are you doing? Why get up? What's the point? Why get up? I'm just gonna beat the shit out of you some more. What's the point? Just stay down. You can't win. Why get up at all?" And Neo struggles, and he gets up, and he looks at him, and he says, "Because I choose to." That was the point of the Matrix. The point of the Matrix was this exact dichotomy. It was exploring the difference between the way the machines perceive reality and the way that humans perceive reality. The machines perceive it deterministically, that everything that happens is a result of causality. Whatever happened before dictates what happens next. But the humans say no. Reality is not a function of determinism. It's a function of choice. That human beings somehow have the ability to choose, and that variable of choice is something the machines simply can't account for. And because they can't understand it, they can't prevent Neo from changing their reality, from changing the system. They're part of the same closed system that Neo is part of. They do not have all of the information. They think they do, but they don't have all the information. Marvelous, you have your hand up? Go for it, my dude.
No, I think I've had it before. Thank you. Great quote, by the way.
Awesome. And Dev9, I love what you have to say. I kind of wanted to just really comment on what you were saying as far as the role of science fiction. And I want to be clear that I do not see the role of science fiction as to predict. I don't think that's the purpose. I don't think that we create science fiction so that we can predict what's to come. I think science fiction is a thought experiment. One that says, as these new technologies that we can foresee become more fully developed and more fully accessible, what are all the possible things that could happen? And then putting oneself in those positions and saying, okay, if I were a person at that time in that place and I had access to this technology, what would I do with it? What would other people do with it? How would we understand the nature of our reality? Is it possible that we could spend so long in a simulation that we forget that we're in one? Right. So these are all things that I think science fiction serves to achieve, not to try to dictate or tell us here's what reality is going to be, but to prepare us by having us consider the possibilities of what could come, what the future could be, so that we can make better choices now, better choices before we build these things as to how to build them in such a way as to avoid the dystopias. I think we create dystopias in fiction not because we think the dystopias are inevitable, but because we think the dystopias are preventable.
Yeah, no, I know, Dapper. I know. I mean, I know you. In the way you approach things, it's very much in a sense of discovery and openness, just for the sake of it, for the right reason. Yeah, no, I'm not, and I'm not thinking that. I just, it's the word science fiction. It was just to point out mostly that, from what I understand of science fiction, again, like I said, it was something my father just, that's all he read, science fiction. It's that beyond science fiction is science reality. Always science reality after science fiction. And science fiction is it's a very interesting thing. I would say maybe on 1 century, maybe 2 centuries. I don't know what that cycle is. Maybe it's similar to the cycle of fiat. Like how long homogeny lasts, or you're right, like a currency lasts, something like that. But the reality always comes back, and so it's just a very interesting thing to be having these discussions right now at the very early stages of some very, I think, monumental changes, and being able to have that kind of notion that you know what, in the end, reality is going to decide. And that means us. And what you just said about the Matrix, what you added there, it points out to me the quantum aspect of it. So this deterministic thing about the machines. And if you know about like in history, when machines first came online, they were deemed to be the devil, right? They were the church tried to ban them. They were, supposedly 666 is symbol of what is mechanical. So I was this notion that the machine, well, rather that reality is quantum, right? Or spiritual. And so Neo, when he's that choice, he really is just a reflection of reality as a whole. He's a piece of reality, right? Human being. And so he's that quantum factor that machines could never understand, and which anything which is mechanical, I think it was an intuitive thing about religion or the spiritual aspect that was not a good thing, or it was a destructive thing. So we're definitely going to be facing those kind of forces, and I think that everything that I said is wrong in like smaller like niches. Okay, so there are going to be people that are going to try these science fiction kind of deterministic ways of doing things. There's probably going to be elites, people that would like to have these things be, as usually there are, and these systems. And yeah, it's maybe going to take a full 100 years for it to go full circle. People are going to fall into simulations and all that, and in the end, we're going to come out. But at the same time, I think we're going to be there's going to be a battle, and hopefully, the majority wins the most, the quicker, in clearly, dictating that these things are a means to an end, and they are not to be an end in reality. They're going to try to bring this fantasy of deterministic or controlled or perfect is better than real. They're going to try to sell it one way or another, be for their own advantage or try to make us think it's an advantage. But at the end of the day, I think the real situation is going to be, we're going to want these things to be integrated in certain ways, but to serve our real purposes, our real lives, and our real needs. People are going to keep to be like Neo. Okay. Yeah.
So let me ask you a question, and this isn't about the future or science fiction. This is rooted in fact, right? This is rooted in today.
Yeah.
Why do people use centralized platforms? Be they social networks like Twitch or like Twitter or Instagram or TikTok or YouTube or Twitch or any of these centralized platforms. Why do people use them?
Right. Great question. So centralized platforms, as a whole, they're more efficient and they're more expeditious to achieve results, okay, than decentralized ways. So in the last, let's say, we'll say 40, 50 years, it's the most, like, that's what wins the race to get any kind of tangible result. And in that process, there's experimentation and discovery of what's possible, new innovations, all those kind of things, and what they could be used for. And so, like, we take the internet as an example. We've just been through that, and people now have kind of an established use case for the internet. Social networking became the thing mostly, and communication. But then what's happening right now, what we're facing right now with all that's going on, is that we're actually at the very beginning of moving. I think we were talking last week, I forget exactly, but this notion of what's actually at play right now in the world. Is it between the U.S. and China? Is it between the rich and the poor, the elite, the haves and haves not? Like, what is the forces? Actually, the forces, for the most part, are ones of centralization versus decentralization. So after all this centralization, we're going to come back to decentralization, to the chagrin of the centralized forces. And we're going to be seeing in the next few years the backlash and the resistance, mostly from the centralized forces. And we're going to see the emergence and the strengthening of the decentralized forces. Namely us, individuals, fighting back.
Let me ask you a question,
Yeah.
because you said that we're going to see this backlash against the centralized forces, and we're going to see the rise of decentralized alternatives.
Yeah.
My question is, Twitter, people have been trying to create decentralized alternatives to Twitter for years. I mean, it's not something that just happened since Elon Musk took over. It's something that people have been trying to do since Twitter's existed. And every single one of these decentralized alternatives that somebody tries to create, like Mastodon or just, any of these other systems, they never achieve critical mass. Why is Twitter, this centralized platform, still the dominant platform in that niche? How come these decentralized alternatives haven't taken off?
Yeah, but how can a decentralized isn't that like a contradiction in a way? How can a decentralized force have the dominant mass?
Right. So do you see now when you say that people would never choose these sort of suboptimal situations, do you realize that like people don't consciously choose them, but consider the incentives? Here, let me ask you another question that'll kind of get back to the
No, but
beginning.
no, but okay, but wait, just a second. I mean, as a single platform or entity in their totality, they could compete with a centralized entity, but individually, decentralized kind of implies that there's many. You know, it's like having local economies. I forget where the conversation. Someone was talking about like mayors talking to each other in one space or another in the last week or so. Was that you that
It was
talked
not
about
me talking about mayors, no.
mayors that were talking to each other? Okay, I forget where I heard that. Okay, so yeah, like this notion of mayors to start talking to each other as opposed to these central governments. So you can have these many communities that start standing up, empowering themselves, and as a whole, they far exceed any of the centralized forces eventually, but none of them individually or can overtake. Like that's kind of what decentralization is. So
Okay. So
yeah.
let me bring in a couple other analogies. So let's talk about email. How much do you pay for your email? Whatever email you use, you know, whatever your
Yeah,
preferred email, what how much do you pay for it?
a lot of money, man. No, I I don't pay anything for my email.
Right. Okay. So most of the applications that we think of as the mainstream applications on the internet are free, right? They're quote unquote free. I'm putting free in quotes. Okay.
Yes.
Because we don't pay with money, but we do pay, right? There's no such thing as a free lunch. We pay because we are the product of those applications. And I just want you to consider, why would the metaverse be any different in terms of widespread adoption to the metaverse? Don't you think that widespread adoption is probably going to come in a similar way to that technology as it's come to other internet technologies? That the first really quote unquote successful iterations of it that get a lot of mind share and a lot of daily active users are
Hmm.
not going to be the decentralized open source ones that are built with some sort of good in mind. It's going to be the centralized, privately owned, privately controlled applications where you get to use it either for free or for very cheap. But the reason you get to use it for free or very cheap is because the platform needs you to be there in order to get other people to get there, to be there, in order to get other people to be there, so that it can
Well,
achieve the kind of scale that it needs to be able to actually be a place that people would want to be. There's no point in being in a metaverse with 5 people if there's a
no, no,
metaverse across the street
right,
with 1 million.
right. But you're in that. You're maybe skipping one thing here, though, is that you're kind of supposing that there's no way that the incentive, like when you say you're the product, they have an incentive, that the incentive could not itself be decentralized, or rather distributed differently and have to do with the users themselves. The same service or the requirement, let's say we'll take an example as privacy. If privacy means something for people and they're willing to pay, some are willing to pay, we're willing to pay to be on Bitcoin, use Bitcoin. So privacy and security, if those are things that people are willing to pay one way or another, be monetarily, directly, or through just, you know, being a user of a platform, um, that incentive structure could be as well decentralized and just organized differently.
It could be, and remember what I said.
Yeah.
The goal of science fiction is not to be predictive. It's to consider these ideas. And the reason that I
Right.
bring up these other analogies of email and just every other application on the internet is because just because there could be a viable decentralized version of something doesn't mean that the first version of it that reaches what you might consider to be success or broad use is going to be decentralized. And in fact, every technology that I can think of has initially come
Right.
to the market as a centralized, centrally controlled, centrally owned
Right. Okay.
business first. And then
Right.
only over time, as people experience the negatives associated with being part of those centralized
Right.
technologies,
So
do
so
people start to
right.
explore and build the decentralized. So consider when you were
Yeah.
saying that maybe you didn't necessarily, you feel that sometimes science fiction goes too far into fiction and veers too far from science fact.
I
Just
don't know. I don't know
can
how to say it, Deborah, exactly. But let me. I first of all, let me just say this is super valuable. Like all these questions, right? These like we're getting to the heart of the matter through all of this. It's super valuable. I feel. Let me ask you a question in response to that question of the decentralization. What is to you the value, the inherent bottom, the true for the users value of that decentralization? We're talking of it a little bit in the abstract as if it's better. We're supposing as if it's better or it's different. But what is really, why is it better? Why does a user or could a users want decentralization other than the word? Like
yeah,
for the
no, I mean
real.
that's a beautiful question because I think the entire point of writing Heroes of the Refresh is to attempt to answer that. I think the point of Heroes of the Refresh is, again, not to be predictive of what I think is coming, but rather consider it to be a parable, a future history parable that allows us to consider how is it that we could find ourselves one day, we just wake up one day and we realize, oh shit, we're in this centralized, centrally controlled metaverse. What are the implications of that? And how can we learn from what our characters go through? And how can we see the dark sides of what could happen in that kind of reality so that we understand the benefit? I think one doesn't necessarily understand the benefits of decentralization until one is exposed to the negatives of centralization. And sometimes the
Exactly.
negatives of centralization are so endemic to our experience that we don't understand that it even could be another way, because it's just what we've always, we think about the central banking system and people have lived their entire lives. We've lived our entire lives with banks and governments, and that all just seems like kind of normal or like how things are. But consider the
Exactly.
possibility that all of that, all of those structures are inherently, I don't have a correct word here. Consider that there's another way things could be that we haven't ever seen before, done before,
Well,
experienced
yeah.
before, because the
That
technology didn't exist until Bitcoin existed for us to have some kind of decentralized source of record that could be the underlying substrate of something that's truly decentralized.
Exactly. And so that's kind of my question here. It's to put an analogy easy to understand. It's like an extreme example here, but why would, let's say 100 years ago we'd have a discussion, we'd be talking about communism or Nazism or fascism, right? And people wouldn't know yet what the downside to that is. It's all seems cool, trending. Um, and then we'd have these discussions hypothetically of what, well, it's kind of that. Yeah, we don't know yet, or most people don't understand necessarily what the downside of centralization is, and we're kind of in the process of learning it. And then once the lessons are learned the hard way, um, people now, if things start looking a little too much like communism or fascism, they have something to refer to and kind of say, whoa, what the hell are we doing here? So that's kind of my question to you. What's, these are just words, centralization and decentralization, but what would be the tangible thing? What is the tangible thing that makes decentralization or those kind of services better than centralized one? What's the main thing for a person?
I mean, again, I'd say the entire book is hopefully going to
Okay.
address that quite complex
Oh, okay.
question, but it's a very big question that I would hate to try to boil down to a single sentence,
I
but I'll try.
okay. Okay.
I'd say that the dangers of centralization do not they are not obvious, especially within the context of if all you've ever known is a centralized structure. It's not always obvious why a centralized structure is a form of slavery. But long story short, centralization creates distorted incentives. And if somebody has the ability to exploit a system for personal gain, eventually, even if the people who are in positions of authority or power are not evil people, eventually evil people will find their way into those positions because they are incentivized to. Because the system creates incentives that allow people to take advantage of these centralized points of control in order to exploit, subjugate, control other people. And the value of decentralization in that context is to be able to have a line of defense against that, such that it wouldn't be possible for any one entity or group of entities to hijack the reality or the truth of a situation, whether that's a metaverse or how much money is in your bank account or whether you can travel, across borders.
Right. I'll put a word to it. I'll dare boil it down to a single word here. Sovereignty. That's what Neo was fighting about. And sovereignty is the thing that people are willing to pay the price for. They're willing to die for it, actually. History has shown us. And so if people are willing to pay the price, be monetarily or through, whatever centralized systems get now to have their adoption, give them, or get those incentive structures could be, I believe, decentralized and better organized. And we're in the process of figuring that out. And it's unfortunately, we're still under the same weight of centralization is so much more efficient and expedient in organizing and getting things together. But that's all that we need to do. And if we can set the incentive structure so that either you pay monetarily, for your email, okay, a few bucks, you could get all those things, right? But you want it free? Okay, well, we're going to have to create a decentralized incentive structure, something that's going to give you a reason to use our service, and which the service itself will be able to maintain itself in a decentralized way. And that's where we're struggling to establish.
Right. And it all comes down to what? To incentives, right?
It costs.
When we think about the economics of choice, the economics of choice are all about incentives. The reason why Bitcoin is able to function as a decentralized protocol is because that protocol was written with incentives baked into it that incentivized all of the desired behaviors that the protocol needed in order to be successful. It incentivized security being provided to them, right? It incentivized block production. It incentivized running a full node. All of these things, you benefit if you opt in. You have a way of benefiting through the tokenization of what we consider to be the virtues of that platform. When blocks are produced, those blocks represent a good, a public good that has been created. This decentralized, immutable ledger is a public good. Every new block that gets produced adds to this public good, makes it that much stronger, that much more, there's that much more information being added each time. And every block that gets confirmed is one more block of certitude that all the blocks that came before it are true, right? That's the first time in human history we ever created something like that. We're only 15 years into having something like that. So we're really, as human beings, at the very beginnings of contemplating decentralization as an idea. I mean, the technology to create decentralized structures at a large scale did not exist until 15 years ago. So there's so much territory, so much unexplored intellectual real estate for us to examine and explore. And perhaps the role of science fiction is to speed that exploration up, to give us the opportunity to consider and interact with realities that don't exist yet, so we can have a head start on maybe that learning curve of seeing why, why would a centralized metaverse be bad, and what kinds of things could happen in a centralized metaverse that we wouldn't necessarily see coming until they were already here. And that's sort of the intent behind Heroes of the Refresh. It's to have a metaphor that people can use for exploring some of these ideas that they may not have explored before. And the purpose of the metaphor is not to be predictive or to be true. The purpose of the metaphor is to provoke thought today about these things that have not been built yet, so that we can make better choices.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And I think it's a good also, oftentimes science fiction, there's this tendency for the dystopian view of things. And then, we find out like things that just didn't happen like that. Sometimes it's maybe a utopian view, but often there's that dystopian tendency. And so it's a great exercise. But I will note that, like, you started all of these talks with what I feel is the science reality, the greater simulation, the quantum aspect. And so this is the counterpart, I feel, and it's a great, direction to look at how could it go and what would be the natural, pitfalls or things that could happen as we know humans to do things, in this fiction. It allows all those questions to arise, and then to see them before, as a, visionary, in a visionary way. It's awesome, man.
Awesome. Dev9, thank you so much for joining me today. I really, really appreciate it. Marvelous and Astral, thank you as well for joining us up on stage. I'd like to, kind of start moving us towards wrapping up. But before I do, I wanted to put out one last call for anyone else who would like to join the stage. If you have any thoughts or ideas that you'd like to express, something quick, or, anything that was provoked or, prodded by this conversation that excites you. I'd like to, kind of quickly tell you a little bit about myself with regards to science fiction. So I grew up loving sci-fi. I mean, all of my favorite movies and TV shows growing up were related to sci-fi. It just always fascinated me. Whether it was dystopias like Terminator 2, that was one of my favorite movies as a kid. And I mean, what is Terminator 2 at the end of the day? It's a dystopia about AI, right? It's a dystopia about our fears about AI. What is Total Recall about? It's a dystopia about our fears of technology replacing memories. And it was based on a book a short story by Philip K. Dick called We'll Remember It For You Wholesale. When you think about these sci-fi movies and TV shows that form the basis of your own personal mythology, and we all do have a personal mythology. It's not, science fiction for some people. For some people, that mythology takes a different form. But for me, it's always been sci-fi. The purpose of these sci-fi stories, yes, it's entertaining. Yes, it delights the imagination. But the purpose of these stories is not predictive. It's not the reason why the Terminator is a valuable metaphor is not because we really necessarily think that we're going to create Skynet and that it's going to play out like that. The reason why it's a useful metaphor is because it has us examine not the inevitability of Skynet, but the reasons why Skynet could happen. Why could Skynet happen? And if Skynet happened, what would we do about it? How would we react to it? What does it mean to us, right? All of those questions are relevant, not because of the future that is prescribed or predicted by these works of fiction, but by what it tells us about the world we live in now. What does Total Recall tell us about the way our memories work now. What does Terminator 2 tell us about the ways that we use AI now and the way that we build AI now? Ready Player One was a great example that was brought up because Ready Player One was one of the first works of speculative fiction that examined what are the dangers of a centralized metaverse. What could happen in a centralized metaverse, right? It's one of the only analogies that people can even think of when they think of metaverses. They think of Ready Player One, they think of The Matrix. These works of fiction are, for most people, the first time they've ever thought about these ideas. And so when we create fiction, we have an opportunity to wake people up, not to what's going to happen. Because as Dev9 pointed out, what's going to happen, the future rarely resembles, the way we lay it out in science fiction. Go back and read, Arthur C. Clarke, go read, anybody who thought that by now we'd be, driving space cars or we'd be, doing all this stuff in space, right? The timing is usually wrong on these stories. We have no idea how long it's going to take for us to have realistic simulations that are indistinguishable from reality. We don't know how long it's going to take for us to be able to have colonies on Mars, real colonies to keep a connection we live on. We get the time scale wrong. But consider that time is a variable in this equation, and that the value of these stories is not predicting what's going to happen, but considering the degrees of freedom within which humanity has choices to make, considering what those degrees of freedom are, and isolating what the choices are, so that we can critically examine the choices, not the results. Go ahead, Devin.
Yeah, no, sorry. I was just to ask you, what's your thoughts on, I remember an interview, maybe you guys have seen this. I was like, just stuck with me as so ludicrous. It was Stephen Hawking's, not so, like maybe a year or two before he died, where he was explaining as a matter of fact that humanity had 200 years to, colonize in space and live on another planet, and that this was like just a fact of the matter. Or, like the idea of living on Mars. A lot of people seem to think this is some kind of, reality, or it's down the pipeline, it's coming. What are your thoughts on that notion? Do you think human beings really care for that to happen, and that's like realistic thinking? And Stephen Hawking he's a very smart person, but
I think the reason why we examine the idea of, for example, forming a colony on Mars or a moon or another planet is not necessarily because there are things that we hope to achieve in a positive sense by going and establishing those colonies. Like, for example, we're going to build this colony on Mars, and then we're going to get something out of that that's going to kind of pay for it or justify it. I don't think that's why science fiction writers, or in this case, Stephen Hawking, who's very much writing about what he, his belief about the facts of the universe and what's coming. I think the reason why we consider that is not because of the affirmative benefits, but because of the risks of humanity continuing to be a single planet species. And I think people are afraid that something could happen here on Earth that could cause our own extinction, and that by creating colonies in other places which are self-sufficient enough such that if something happened to Earth, that these other colonies would be able to persist. The idea is that these colonies allow humanity to become that much more anti-fragile, that much more resistant to, eventually one day we're going to get to the point where we can solve all these problems, X, Y, Z, but between here and there, if we nuke ourselves to death, we'll never get there. So the idea is, if we
exactly.
build these colonies, it's an insurance policy for humanity that we don't kill ourselves with a bioweapon or some bullshit where we make Earth uninhabitable totally. I think that's the thought. That's definitely what Elon Musk has talked about, because he's, as a big proponent of building something on Mars.
He is. Did you see that? Did you see that interview with Hawkins?
No, I don't think I saw the Stephen Hawking interview, but I'm gonna have to look that up after our space because I want to see what he
Check that
had to
out.
say.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, yeah, kind of interesting. It was interesting that he didn't raise the question of using all the money for the military aerospatial complex to maybe solve some problems here and maybe extend our our life beyond 200 years from such an intelligent guy. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, Stephen Hawking is a trip. I mean, I've read A Brief History of Time probably 2 or 3 times, and I remember the very first time I read it, just this sort of like when I first started really understanding the idea of different quantum realities existing in parallel with each other, that you could have from every moment, every moment is now this variable, and there's this unknown quantity in that variable that can never really be measured. You can't really put your finger on it, but every time something happens where there's a degree of freedom between X and Y, A and B, J and K, there's always a different possible reality that gets created as a result of that juncture. And that the more time goes by, the more distance has been created between each of these realities. Hawking demonstrates that through a spatial analogy of distance, but he's talking about the quantum layer, and I think that was, I think I read that when I was like, I don't know, like maybe 13 or 14, and I just remember like really my mind being blown and being like, fuck, like reality is not what I thought it was, and maybe no one knows what reality is. I remember walking away from that book feeling like Stephen Hawking doesn't even know what reality is, and that's good. I mean, I came away from that being like, oh my god, like this is so much bigger and harder to understand and more unknowable than I would have ever thought. And the fact that this genius is writing about it with all of these variables and his own explanation, where he doesn't really know for reals what this is. He's as much in wonder at these ideas as I am. To me, that was very inspiring and very empowering. It's empowering as a human being when you know that the smartest people who've ever lived view the world with a sense of wonder and uncertainty, because if we're not also viewing the world with that sense of wonder and uncertainty, it's because we're not seeing the great degrees of freedom that exist in our universe that these great thinkers are seeing. So for me, it was kind of eye-opening and inspiring. I think that's the way, any kind of work of, whether it's science fiction, speculative science, a lot of what we think of as quantum theory is sort of a mix between what's verifiable and what's theoretical. There's aspects of quantum theory that aren't really provable. The math tells us that certain things are true, but we can't really verify it or test it. So I'd like to think that the best science fiction is one step beyond that, where we start rooted in what you refer to, Def 9, as science fact, and we go one step beyond that, where it's still anchored to something that's real, or anchored to something that is being talked about outside of the realm of fiction. But when we don't know what's outside, what's behind the green curtain, we don't know. Science fiction allows us to take a peek and speculate, and that's what inspires me about sci-fi. That's what it has inspired me to start writing Heroes of the Refresh, is to start exposing maybe thousands, millions of people one day to these ideas, where for the first time they're going to really be thinking about what kind of metaverse are we building, and what kind of metaverse do we want to live in, and what does it mean for something to be built on an immutable substrate? Where's the digital matter in digital matter theory? Right? All of these ideas are all woven together, right? And so I hope that Heroes of the Refresh becomes a very tangible metaphor for exploring those, where people who maybe aren't so well versed in these other ideas can still latch onto the metaphor and start interacting with them.
If I may just frame in a certain way, and I think this. I mean, I read what you've written and the way you go about yourself. But so I think a way to put it is, that, when you say the most intelligent people, be the scientists, Stephen Hawking or Elon Musk or others, it's the difference between having outsight and insight. And a lot of these scientific minds, they look outwards Okay, and I think that ultimately in these great questions, what would distinguish a really good sci-fi writer, for example, is that balance of outsight and insight. Because, as intelligent as they can be, as intelligent as Stephen Hawking might be, I remember thinking, wow, like there's something he doesn't get here. There was something missing in insight in that vision. That was the only thing that humans could do, was to try to figure out a way to get off this planet within the next 2 centuries. And I was like, come on, man, there's so many other things and so many other reasons why we would not focus in that exact way. Um, and there are very enlightened beings, which I think have answered questions that Elon Musk is struggling with, as to what humanity should do, or the plight of humanity, which have been answered through insight as opposed to outsight or science, and which could be just as valid, if not more. Questions like, well, yeah, eventually we will go extinct, whether we live on Earth or on Mars or on Jupiter or anywhere else eventually. Does it matter? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe that's not the whole point, right? Maybe the point is not to extend life for a few centuries for humankind. Like, that's beside the point. So, just saying here, what you're writing and these whole questions, there's a beautiful play between those two things, and the marrying of those two things. The science, the seeing things, and also the insight, which is like eternal, or in the reality, you know um yeah, in finding answers, right?
Absolutely, man. It's all about it's finding answers and asking more questions, right? Because the answers lead to more questions. Right? So we ask these questions in search of answers, and then the answers sometimes lead to more questions. Dev9, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the stage today. I also want to thank Marvelous and Astral Architect. Thank you so much for coming up and joining us today. We're right about at the 2 hour mark, so I think this is a great spot for us to conclude today's talk. But I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. You guys being here, whether you come up and speak, or whether you prefer to be in the audience attending. This is why I do this. I do this because I see other people who are interested in these same ideas. That inspires me. I think we all inspire each other here. Iron sharpens iron. So I want to thank all of you for taking your time out on a Saturday to join me. And there will be more to come this week. I'm planning on having a fresh prose article out this week, as well as hopefully one more chapter of Here's the Refresh. And next week, we'll be here at the exact same time, 1 p.m. Pacific, on the Saturday of the 29th. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate you. Go touch some grass this weekend. Take care of yourself. Be good to yourselves. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Thank you.